minute, there are faces that I'm equally happy to see. Oh, it's filling up slowly. I'm really happy to see you here. And tonight we're going to do something like a meditation sandwich. And we're going to begin with a meditation. And we're going to purposefully begin with a meditation and very little talking about the class initially. Because things that happen in meditation, especially mindfulness, are non-conceptual. So if we begin on a conceptual note, then sometimes it's hard to find our way fully to the world of the non-conceptual. So we're going to begin with the meditation. And so I'm going to ask you to just find a comfortable sitting position. And, if you have issues and you need to lie down, that's fine. Let's use the word comfortable as our basis for the posture that you're arranging. And of course, the posture does make a difference. So if you're sitting, I'd like you to let the eyes gently close and roll to the front of the sitting bones. Now, those are the hoops of bones at the base of the pelvis, the ischial tuberosities. And they're like rockers on a rocking chair. And if you rock to the front of them, you'll start to feel unstable. I want you to then rock back till you find a place of balance and stability on the ischial tuberosities, the sitting bones. This kind of frees up the tailbone, and you can lift it slightly, microscopically. And what you'll notice is that it deepens the arch in the low back, what's called the lordosis in the low back. And the spine becomes more stable when the curvatures of the spine are reasserted. So when the lumbar spine is reconfigured to have a lordosis, the thoracic spine and the cervical spine kind of automatically reconfigure themselves in the S shape of the spine that's so structurally stable from a bony aspect. This also activates the inner core. So if you let the top of the back of the head feel as if it's pulling into the sky without lifting the chin, so the underside of the chin is parallel to the floor, what you're going to do is activate the inner core muscles. The inner core muscles are so interesting. They, of course, stabilize the spine, and they are the main stabilizers of the spine. The spine has a problem. It needs to be extraordinarily mobile and extraordinarily stable at the same time. Imagine having a job like that. So the spine does that through these cables and muscular attachments. And the inner core is the main stabilizer of the spine. The inner core is also an extraordinary signaling organ. And so it releases these things called cytokines that tell the brain to be ready. It creates readiness in the brain. It also creates in the brain, when you activate the spine, activate the inner core, the awareness of novelty, of possibility. So the brain not only gets ready for something, it knows that that something may be something it's never dealt with before. So it creates an environment to deal with uncertainty, the unknown, mystery. Isn't that interesting? Just by arranging the posture. And so this arrangement is edifying. It improves the chances of you having a successful meditation. Successful in that you're ready for anything. Think of a professional athlete, a third baseman, who has to create this kind of readiness through core strength, core posture, and no two ground balls hit through a third baseman have ever been the same. There's no such thing. They're always somewhat different. So a third baseman has to be ready for anything, and so does a meditator, especially as you move deeper and deeper into the inner world. So just feel now that sense of readiness that you've achieved just by arranging the spine. You might just feel like alertness. But embedded in that alertness is possibility, just by arranging the posture. So in doing this, we've recaptured attention. We've liberated it, broken it out of jail in its usual position, entangled in the mind, entangled in what just happened, entangled in looking into the future and seeing what might happen. Attention now is liberated, and we can bring it to bear in its pure form on the sensory events that are arising in the body. So you may have noticed that what we're doing is liberating attention and then amending it, beginning to create attainments, amendments, companions for this attention. One of the companions is diligence, a kind of honesty or integrity, to look at what's actually happening, what's actually happening. It's a freedom from the evaluative functions of the mind, the categories, stories of the mind. Pure attention, looking at what's really happening, cultivating diligence, honesty, integrity. So notice now, bring attention to the feet. And just notice the sensory events that are arising in the feet right now. So this diligence includes a kind of ability to discern. So in the feet right now, there's sensory events arising from skin, from muscle and connective tissue, and from deeper structures, bones, joints. See if you can pay the kind of attention that can differentiate those sensory arisings. It takes a little practice. And so we're just starting out tonight with the cultivation of diligence. Along with this diligence is a certain kind of effort. This effort is actually called virya. Many of you know that Sanskrit word. It means warrior. So this effort is the effort of a warrior, an athlete, a scholar. It's a significant effort. It's a very, very powerful effort, but it also has the qualities of gentleness and receptivity. Imagine another sports metaphor, but imagine a fullback or a middle guard in professional football holding a newborn baby. That's the kind of effort. Powerful, receptive, gentle. So that you can notice the sensory events arising now from ankles, heel, shins and calves, skin, flesh, bone, joint, knees. And as we find the knees, you can start with the bone and joints, and you know with your eyes closed whether your knee is at a right angle or extended or flexed even more than a right angle. You know that with your eyes closed. Those are sensory events arising from proprioceptive receptors in the knee joint. It knows where it is in space. Skin, light touch, temperature, and if there's a pressure that on the skin that's more active, it might manifest as something we call pain, aversive sensory events. All we're doing is noticing now. And of course, if you're in pain, you always adjust the posture. There's this kind of macho Zen idea that you sit through whatever's going on, but um, that just gets in your way. Just adjust your posture if need be, if there's a painful joint, a painful way of sitting now. Notice the sensory events that are arising from the thighs. Tremendous temperature differential from where the thigh is sitting on the couch or the chair or the floor, and the top of the thigh. If you can find it, see if you can pay that kind of attention. So another amendment or companion that we create for this um, attention, this awareness, this noticing, this watching, is friendliness or kindliness or compassion or wholehearted acceptance. One of what are called the Brahman Viharas, the abodes of creation, the edifying emotional states that are part of the cultivation and the Satipatthana Sutta and really any wisdom system that has a meditative practice associated with it. So it's a friendly, kindly, amused, joyful, accepting attention. This will become more and more important as we go through different domains. We're going to take attention through different domains of existence, the different domains of experience. And in each domain, we cultivate different attainments and skills necessary for the subject tonight, emotional regulation. Find the spine, belly, rib cage, sides of the body, mid back, shoulder blades, shoulders. And we may find as we look at the shoulders that there may be patterns of tension being held in the shoulders or the arms. And this is an opportunity to, with an exhalation, just to release and let go of those patterns of tension that may have accrued there during the day, during a lifetime. Just let the shoulder blades slide down the back of the rib cage. And if you wish, you can roll the shoulders up and back and then exhale and slide the shoulders down. The difference here is that we're watching all the sensory events without making stories. And perhaps I should say that better, without getting involved in the inevitable stories that the mind wants to spin in trying to recapture attention. The mind creates evaluations and comparisons, narratives, categories, all sorts of concepts to help you supposedly deal with reality. And what you end up dealing with is conceptual reality. So we're breaking that chain at this point, deconstructing the usual way of creating a conceptual existence. And we're creating a sensory existence. We're not trying to squelch the mind, not trying to turn it off, not trying to push it away. We just notice that when the mind intercedes, we notice that it is interceding and we disconnect and go back to giving attention the simple job of finding the sensory events that are happening in the arms now, elbows, forearms, fingers, skin, flesh, bone, and joint. What's happening in the face, in the back of the head? The musculature in the face creates these tiny patterns of tension. There are organs of facial expression, which are highly represented in the brain. And patterns of tension accrue during the day, during a lifetime. Here's an opportunity to find those patterns with this diligent, powerful, friendly attention and release them. See if you can make the face like a baby's face, soft and peaceful. You can create that kind of attention. There's a kind of a principle in meditation systems in general and mindfulness in specific, and that's the move from gross to subtle. It's pretty easy to find in these. It's a little harder to find the patterns of tension in the face. And now we're going to go to something even more subtle, which is the movement of the breath in the body. So just for tonight, you might make the breath a tiny bit bigger so that you can follow its movement. Watch the breath move all the way down into the belly. And with inhalation, the diaphragm pushes down. It pushes all the abdominal contents into the pelvic bowl and against the floor of the pelvis. See if you can pay that kind of attention, that you can watch that happening with inhalation and exhalation. It's happening. See if you can find it. Likewise, as you inhale, the tops of the lungs push against the collarbones, push against the pelvic girdle. And there's a tiny movement in collarbones and a tinier movement, microscopic movement in the humerus, the big bones in the arm, they externally rotate. It's happening. You can find it. Gentle, powerful, friendly, honest attention, free from the events in the mind, thoughts, feelings, emotions. Those are different things, feelings and emotions. See if you can feel the rib cage swing up like the ribs swing up like bucket handles, and the breastbone move up and out. See if you can pay that kind of attention. And finally, for this meditation tonight, this first meditation, find a point of concentration. There are many different ways to do this, but we usually pick a subtle movement. Some traditions follow the path of the breath on the rim of the nostril, With inhalation, the breath is cool and sharp and then disappears back up into the nasal cavity and then reappears with exhalation, warm, heavy with moisture, rolling across the rim of the nostrils and the upper lip. Let's use that as our point of concentration tonight. We will talk a lot about concentration, work a lot with concentration. Concentration elicits peace and tranquility, calmness. It's a refuge, has to be cultivated. It's one of the attainments, one of the factors of enlightenment. It's one of the arms of the Eightfold Path. Concentration. By the way, there's no clenching in concentration, just the opposite. Even though it takes tremendous effort, it's a soft, relaxed, gentle, receptive effort. And so many of you are probably practiced meditators, and you know there are domains of concentration, one-pointed concentration. And each domain has its own attainments. And the whole point in these attainments is to edify, improve, make more skillful the next phase, which we'll talk about in the class, which is investigation, inquiry. For the yogis, Vitarka and Vichara, people with Buddhist backgrounds, Vipassana, investigation. So tonight we'll stop here in concentration. And I just want you to think back and remember how we got here. Basically, we created an edifying posture. We liberated attention, purified it, and then created useful amendments and attainments, accompaniments, as we move through the first establishment of mindfulness. Body, breath, and then added concentration. So when you're ready, just let the eyes open. Come back into the Zoom room. Hello. I think we got, all right, we got a full house here. So what we're going to talk about tonight is just give you kind of a basis for the class that we're offering. And the class is 4 weeks, 2 hours a night on Tuesday night. 7 to 9 Eastern Standard Time. A lot of people from the West Coast. I'm not good at math, but I think that's, what is that, 4 to 6, something like that? Carry the one, I get mixed up. Anyways, so, and what we're going to do in this class is, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do when there's a little slideshow we're going to do, but I have this poem that I'm dying to read to you. And so I want to start with that. This is a Mary Oliver poem. It's called Snowy Night. Last night, an owl in the blue dark tossed an indeterminate number of carefully shaped sounds into the world in which a quarter mile away I happened to be standing. I could not tell which one it was, the bard or the great horned ship of the air. It was distant, but anyway, aren't there moments that are better than knowing something and sweeter? Snow was falling, so much like stars, filling the dark trees, that one could easily imagine its reason for being was nothing more than prettiness. I suppose if this was someone else's story, they would have insisted on knowing whatever is knowable, would have hurried over the fields to name it. The owl, I mean. But it's mine, this poem of the night, and I just stood there listening and holding out my hands to the soft glitter falling through the air. I love this world, but not for its answers. And I wish good luck to the owl, whatever its name. And I wish great welcome to the snow, whatever its severe and comfortless and beautiful meaning. I'm going to read that one again. I have a point to make with this poem. I don't know if it got that yet, but here it comes. Last night, an owl in the blue dark tossed an indeterminate number of carefully shaped sounds into the world in which, a quarter mile away, I happened to be standing. I could not tell which one it was, the bard or the great horned ship of the air. It was distant. But anyway, aren't there moments that are better than knowing something and sweeter? Snow was falling, so much like stars filling the dark trees, that one could easily imagine its reason for being was nothing more than prettiness. I suppose if this were someone else's story, they would have insisted on knowing whatever is knowable, would have hurried over the fields to name it. The owl, I mean. But it's mine, this poem of the night, and I just stood there listening and holding out my hands to the soft glitter falling through the air. I love this world, but not for its answers. And I wish good luck to the owl, whatever its name. And I wish great welcome to the snow, whatever its severe and comfortless and beautiful meaning. So, that is a poem about conceptual knowledge versus, wisdom, which is not a knowledge that you achieve and organize and maintain and defend. This is a different kind of knowledge that we'll be gaining in this, hopefully, in this class. And it'll be, it's not that one of these knowledges is better than the other. They go in hand. But in our culture, we're much more interested in discursive knowledge, conceptual knowledge, categorical knowledge, knowledge that we have to gain and achieve, and organize and maintain and revise, as opposed to the knowledge that comes from wisdom, which is kind of an inherent, innate knowledge that's already there and just requires a little uncovering. It's two different ways to kind of be in the world. And emotional regulation relies on the second kind of knowledge, not discursive knowledge. You can't figure your way out of an emotion. I mean, you can try, and you'll. It's akin to rearranging the deck chair on the Titanic. So we'll be learning that. So what I want to do now is just show you a little slideshow, and just to give you an introduction to the idea of emotional regulation. It's a little sciencey, not bad. I'm I'm considering adding to it. In the class, depending on how this goes over. I know some of the people in this Zoom room. We've got some scientists in the Zoom room, so you know, one of the reasons I read that poem was uh, to put a little chill in on the scientist's world. Um, uh, so uh, so the slideshow has some of this discursive knowledge, which I want you to use as inspiration rather than solution to emotional issues. So, Kishwara, if you could start that slideshow. Okay, great. And why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide, please? So this is a kind of a definition of emotional regulation. And this is from something that I remembered reading. I couldn't find the exact quote, but it was a Jack Kornfield definition. And I love it very much. Emotional regulation is the wisdom that knows what feelings and emotions are present without being lost in them. It's the wisdom that knows what feelings, hedonic valence, hedonic tone, and emotions, what we think of as emotions are actually secondary emotions. Knowing what emotions are present, the process of creation of emotions are present without getting lost in them. Rabbit holes, propagations. That's emotional regulation in a nutshell. It's a nice definition. Next slide, please. So emotions are um, the dynamic quality of the mind. No emotions, no movement in the mind. Emotions create an inevitable propagation of thoughts, and more emotions, and more feeling tones. And the reason for that is to know and engage the world, to engage your existence. Without emotions, the mind can't do that. Emotional regulation is tied to stilling these spinning whirlpools in the mind. Some of the yogis in the room will recognize these as vrittis, V-R-I-T-T-I, whirlpools in the mind. And when you bundle vrittis, when you bundle these emotion thinking recursives, spinning wheels in the mind, when you bundle them, it's called vasanas. Vasanas are something like destiny, the things that kind of rule existence. So if you want to regulate those, you have to quiet them, befriend them. Now, isn't that an interesting word? That's not figuring things out, is it? It's befriending them. It's a conversation. It's a relationship. Stilling, befriending, and disidentifying. Just the act of standing back and seeing them is an act of disidentification. Just saying, I have this feeling, is an act of standing back and watching the feeling. So that disidentification becomes even more prominent as we learn to regulate emotions. Next slide, please. So emotions are very interesting in that when they arise in the mind, and again, I'm going to qualify this, these are secondary emotions. When they arrive in the mind, when they arise in the mind, they have an imperative quality. They take over. They want to own existence. They want to own the current experience. And they're very, well, intrusive. They interrupt goal-directed behavior, shift attention, and they force their way into awareness. They capture awareness. They own it or try to own it, for better or for worse. So this is a survival mechanism. It's a survival mechanism. It occurs in every organism evolution up the evolutionary chain. Emotion is intimately tied to survival, and survival means that it has to be the boss, for better or for worse. Often emotions are edifying, positive, and frequently emotions are afflictive. And it's the afflictive patterns that we're clueless of, they're called automatisms, that get us in trouble, that bring suffering into our life. Next slide, please. So William James, one of the transcendentalist physicians and scientists of the last century, was very clear that emotions can be modulated, changed, reshaped, reconfigured. And they're not obligatory. They become obligatory only when you're lost in them, as Jack Kornfield talks about. When you're lost in emotions, they run the show. When you're watching them and bringing discernment and wisdom, clarity of thinking to them, they become malleable and subject to modification, subject to being removed, in fact, if they're afflictive. Next slide. Ishwar can get the next slide, please. Uh-oh. Are you still there, Ishwar? Can you slide the slide? Well, oops.
Sorry, I lost it for a second. Apologies.
Okay, no problem. Can you get the, there we go. There we go. Ah, okay. So we want the next slide from this one. Thank you. All right. All right. So, emotions don't just occur in the mind. You know this. You feel them all over the body. They're a subjective experience. They change central and peripheral physiology. An emotion like fear, think about how that moves through the body. Think of what it does to the stress response. And think about what a chronic emotion like chronic smoldering anger creates in the body in terms of central and peripheral physiology and behavior. Aversive feeling states that create loss of exploratory behavior can limit your mind. And of course, that can become a disorder like agoraphobia and highly limit your mobility in the world. Next slide. So emotions activate things. They make us feel something, but they also make us feel like doing something. And at the same time, they provide metabolic support for action. They create an endocrine signature, a stress response that is supportive of the movement, the action that we need to take. Next slide. Emotions have another kind of dark side to them. It's called a refractory period. They filter what's happening. Emotions not only own your existence, but they say nothing else can happen while I'm present. No other knowledge sets can come in. Think of what that does to learning. They change the way you interpret data, the way you remember data, and they make data acquisition, memory congruent with the quality of the emotion. So anger begets anger. They also tell us where to direct attention. And in fact, they might even make an object of attention. We call that projection. So this refractory period can be a very dark phenomenon. You can be angry, and if the object of the anger is ambivalent or you can't find it, you can make up a story about that anger And it can be a pretty wild story. Maybe you've seen that lately in the world around us. This projection and these conspiracy kind of things that happen when emotion is mismanaged. Next slide. So we talk about suppression and repression, and just to let you know, well, most of us, I mean, I learned when I was in college and medical school that suppression was a high functioning defense mechanism. This is Anna Freud, and was carried forward even into the cognitive behavioral world. But suppression actually increases the physiologic response to emotion, the stress response. And not only does it increase the physiologic response to the suppressor, but it does to the suppressor's social partners. Isn't that interesting? It's infectious. It decreases behavioral response, it impairs memory, comes late in the emotion generating process. Emotion has momentum. Think about a big truck on the top of a hill and the brakes pop off and the truck starts rolling down the hill. In the beginning, in the early stages, you can put a brick under the wheel and it'll just stop. But once that truck gains momentum, there's very little you can do to stop it. And suppression is inadequate to really manage emotion, and it just causes more problems. So the Stoic management of Stoicism as a management for emotion is wonderful to see, but it in the movies, but it doesn't really work. Next slide. So just to throw in, that there are all kinds of psychological theories and data collecting processes around those theories. And so I wanted to throw in, there are these big camps of scholarly endeavor. Yale is one, Soloway and Petrides, and Stanford is one, James Gross, Sapolsky. And down in UCLA, Dan Siegel has a whole nother set of ideas about emotional development. And he sees emotion as a central organizing principle in the brain and therefore in the mind. And he also is very clear, as is Paul Eckert and some other people, that your individual ability to process emotions has much to do with your success in life. A while back, the studies that Eckert was doing were kind of captured by Daniel Goleman, or a science writer, very bright PhD psychologist from Harvard, and he coined the term emotional intelligence. Remember that? And the early studies and the subsequent studies have shown that people with emotional intelligence, which now I'm calling emotional, not I, but many of the scientific community, people in the scientific community are calling emotional regulation, that people who had skills in emotional regulation were virtuosic, good at it, did better interpersonally, vocationally, socially, and intrapersonally. They were happier than their counterparts. So this emotional regulation is not a trivial endeavor. It pays off in terms of, well, I guess you'd call it destiny. The next slide. So this is a complex slide, and it's not complex so that we'll go through all these different bullet points. But the point of this slide is that there are many doors into emotional regulation. You don't have to enter in a singular place. And down at the bottom, I've talked about this, recursive loops and memory reconsolidation. We'll talk about that in the class. It's a very simple way to step into the propagative process that has to do with emotions arising in the mind, and to do something about them, to gain a sense of mastery, a sense of wisdom around the arising of emotions, especially afflictive patterns. When I say afflictive patterns, it could be anger, it could be depression, it could be arousal, what we call anxiety. So all of these are born of emotion, movement in the mind. and there are pretty simple ways to step into the process and gain mastery over it. And I say they're simple ways; they're not easy, which kind of brings me up to something sort of, due diligence. You have to put some time into this. It's like, well, it's only a little bit harder than learning to scramble eggs. So it's not in itself hard. It's the effort that's necessary and the length of the effort that's necessary that is hard about learning to do emotional regulation using meditation and mindfulness meditation. So this slide is about that there are many places to move. You can go ahead and change that. Thank you. So, so what I want you to know is that emotional regulation is a process. It's not like a disease-based intervention like contemporary medicine or an organ-based intervention. It's a process. If you learn the process, and we did a little chunk of the process tonight in the meditation, if you learn the process, emotional regulation is an inevitable outcome. It's an inevitable outcome. It's similar to like learning something like tennis or ping pong. If you learn the basics, you're much more likely to win games. It's inevitable that if you have learned the process of, scrambling eggs, that the scrambled eggs will taste better at the end. So this process that we're going to learn over 4 weeks, we'll take different domains each week. We'll have homework. And so my due diligence is to tell you that I'm going to ask you to meditate 30 minutes a day and practice the meditations. We're going to have recordings of all the meditations for you. So you can have guided meditations or you can go off on your own. But what we're going to do is move through the 4 establishments of mindfulness and create what the Buddha called a habitat. And that's going to be the first week. We'll talk about creating habitat or domain or terrain, or refuge is the word that gets used a lot in the Buddhist literature. But it is a process. If you learn the process, the emotional regulation happens on its own accord. The process is a purification and uncovering process. And in the process of doing that, emotions come into the wisdom that you've gained, the discernment that you've gained, the clarity of thinking that you've gained, and they're easily, I guess, managed, might be, I don't know if that's the right word, conquered. Anyways, emotional regulation is an inevitable outcome of learning this sort of time-proven process. Okay, thank you, Shwara. You can turn off the slideshow. So all that took a lot more time than I expected, but that's kind of the lay of the land. I usually like to try to close with a meditation, but I wanted to see if there were any burning questions. And you can turn on your mic if you want. And if there are any questions about anything that I talked about tonight, about the meditation, what do you think? The other way you could handle questions is you can send them to me this week. My email is very complex, so get ready. It's Rich Panico, one word, lowercase, at gmail.com. I know that's tough. The way I remember it is panic with an O on the end. That's and there it is. Ashwara is putting it. So you can send me questions. You can send me questions during the week if you have questions about the course. Anything at all. Anything at all. Okay. Well, let's close with the meditation. What do you think? All right. So again, let's just find the posture again. just like we're meeting a friend. Just like we're meeting a friend and creating a reunion. With all the attendant feeling tone, attraction or aversion, and secondary emotions, excitement, affection. And then let's bring awareness to those feeling tones, those emotions. It's called the felt sense. Everybody here knows what a felt sense is. If you pick up a puppy, you have a felt sense of that act. If you see a beautiful sunset, if you see a disaster, there's a felt sense of that disaster. Just find the very subtle felt sense of closing the eyes and re-encountering the posture. It's a subtle object of experience. And it might be in the body. It might be thoughts in the mind. It might be found in the breathing, or usually all of those. Just find that felt sense of the discussion tonight, of the reunion. It's not about it being positive or negative. It's about being something and finding that something. Finding it in the body is usually the most successful place. Walking into the kitchen later on after the session, opening the refrigerator will have a subtle felt sense. It's happening all the time. See if you can find it. Just finding a felt sense usually elicits a positive emotional response. Quietness, peace, joy, a little tiny experience of bliss, even if it's not a positive event that generates the felt sense. Bringing awareness to a subtle object usually creates edifying response. See if you can find that. See if you can make that your point of concentration, that felt sense, and the subtle events that arise from it. If you get lost, no big deal. Find the breath. See if you can discover the felt sense of just breathing. As Mary Oliver found the felt sense of the snow falling in her hands, the felt sense of the owl calling in the woods. What arose for her was a liberating emotional state, a Brahma Vihara. She no longer needed to, quote, know, unquote. And then Mary Oliver could have used that felt sense of freedom, of liberation, as the point of her concentration, point of her meditation. Moving from gross to subtle. Is in a way the name of the game and wisdom skills, the wisdom path. When you find the felt sense, just abandon the memory or the physical or emotional events that created it, and just bring attention to the edifying emotional arisings from the felt sense. This is akin to dropping a bucket down into a well, rope and bucket, pulling up the wonderful water in the well. What you don't want to do is play with the bucket and the rope. It's about the water. Let go of the memory, let go of the events. Find the edifying, positive emotional states. Bring attention, bring concentration to those. Watch what happens. If you get lost, come back to the breathing. Now bring your awareness back into the room. Just notice the sounds around you, the sense of the room. When you're ready, just let the eyes open. Okay, well, that's a sample. I hope you'll be interested in the class. And I want you to know that there's a recording um, that will be available to you. And I'm going to make the slideshow available to you as well. It'll be in a Google Doc that Ishwara will make. I think Ishwara is going to send that to you by email if you've signed up. All right. It's been good to see you. I hope I'll see you again next Tuesday.
Thank you, Ed.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.